Our webinar today is presented by Lisa Tedesco, the Deputy District Director of the Nebraska District Office at the U.S. Small Business Administration. Earlier in her career, Lisa worked on the other side of things, working for a large prime. We are so grateful to have her. She is extremely knowledgeable in the government contracting area and is here to talk to us today about one of the many programs available to help small businesses compete in the marketplace. So Lisa, welcome, and I am turning it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Catherine. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Yeah, this is in the world of government contracting for those of you who have been participating in that market for a while with your business. This has been the long-awaited certification program. So I think we did a webinar a couple of months ago or a month ago on it, and now we're doing it again. We want to make sure we get the information out there prior to the full certification going live, which is upcoming. So we're going to talk about that. But again, so as Catherine mentioned, my name is Lisa Tedesco. I am the Deputy District Director in the Omaha office of the U.S. Small Business Administration, which would be considered our Nebraska District Office. We cover the entire state of Nebraska. Yeah, so I spent most of my career in the private sector, working as a small business officer in the corporate world, sort of bridging that relationship between a large prime contractor and small business subcontractors. And the last 10 years working for the SBA in the various socioeconomic programs. So a lengthy background of watching many changes and regulations over the years for government contracting. So this is one that we're very excited to finally have as a certification. So with that, I think my mistake, I am going to reference a few documents throughout the presentation. So there's a lot of good information out there. I'm going to show you where to find that, but we'll also have Catherine post that or send it out so that you can all get access. However, as I mentioned, all of the documents I mentioned, I will show you where on SBA's new portion of the website where you get certified, where you can find these documents as well. So with that, let me see if I can, the new world of webinars, let me see if I can get it to move forward. There we go. So I'll mention real quick the website. SBA has launched a new website within our SBA.gov website called WOSB Ready. So if you go to that page, you'll see a lot of information. There will be summaries and documents of things that I'm going to talk about today. And then I'm also going to show you the link that you go to for the actual certification. But the WOSB Ready site has a lot of good information. Again, just other types of details. They're going to be about what I cover today. So normally, I suppose if we're face to face, we usually go around the room and I like to sort of get to know the firms, understand if you've done any government contracting or not. Generally, the firms that come to, or the businesses that come to our classes have done, or at least started dabbling in contracting. So you're probably familiar with the former, or what we will now call the former woman-owned small business federal contracting program. It was a self-certification, or actually still is a self-certification until October 15th. But the program is really devised in order to assist woman-owned small businesses opportunities to grow within contracting. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the nuances that the contracting portion of the program has itself, in case you are new, and then we'll talk more about the certification and the procedures for that. But as you may know, the WOSB is one of the 5 socioeconomic categories that is recognized at the federal level. And I say that sort of with the point that keep in mind that is different than what you may run across at the procurement level, at the city level, at the state level, even potentially at the county level. So depending on where your market is and where you're looking for government contracting work, This particular program applies only to federal procurement. So what may happen at a city government level or a state government level will be a little bit different. Some states do recognize woman-owned small business programs, some do not. So it's important for you to do your research to find out, which locales that you want to do work, what kind of programs that they have. But again, this is at the federal level. And at the federal level, we have goals that we have to meet as a government. So SBA is the oversight agency, if you will, that manages and monitors how the agencies, federal government agencies are doing in spending in the various socioeconomic programs, and the woman-owned small business program being one of those. We do have minimum percentages that we expect agencies to spend in prime contracting with small businesses. So we monitor those goals to see how those agencies are doing. And again, with the idea of helping to build capacity and grow the businesses within those socioeconomic categories. We're going to talk a little bit about set-asides as well. For those of you, again, that may be new and not sure what a set-aside is, we'll talk to you a little bit about how to take advantage of the woman-owned small business and economically disadvantaged woman-owned small business set-asides. And we'll also talk a little bit quickly about what the differences between those two are. And again, my point with wanting to cover a little bit of the basics is, again, for those of you that might be new to federal contracting or new to this side of it, it'll help put this whole thing into a little bit of context for you. So we're just going to talk a little bit about some of the basics, and then we'll get into what is happening with the certification. So I mentioned the federal government via SBA, who monitors the goals of the agencies. So we work with the agencies to set the goals each year, and then we monitor at the end of every year to make sure those agencies are meeting their goals. So these are the 4 socioeconomic categories that we monitor the agencies, the 5th being just small business. But the woman-owned small business, which we're going to talk about today, at least 5% of all prime contracts are to be awarded to woman-owned small businesses. So we do that via, just awarding to small businesses that are owned by women, but also via the WOSB, or Woman-Owned Small Business Federal Contracting Set-Aside Program. We also have goals for the 8A program, the Hub Zone program, and the Service Disabled Vet program, which just as a segue in this moment, I'll mention, or I'll reiterate what Catherine mentioned, which is we will be doing courses or webinars actually on the Hub Zone and the 8A program. Those are also certifications through SBA. So we will be doing the one on 8A, as she mentioned, at the end of this month. And then I think if you go to PTAC's website and look at our calendar for the rest of the year, I think there might be one more Hub Zone certification webinar that we'll be doing as well. But again, the idea is to set aside acquisitions in these categories so that you can compete against other members of that same category to help the government meet their goals. So as part of that, so when we talk about set-asides for woman-owned small businesses, as of the regulation today, not to say that this won't change in the future, but the woman-owned small business program does have a little bit of a nuance to it versus the other programs. So we're not going to get too heavily into this class. We do a few classes throughout the year on, actually we do one every month, on the basics of government contracting and understanding what industry codes are and that kind of thing. So if you're not familiar with a NAICS code or a NAICS code, you may want to look at taking our basics class. But all federal requirements or contracts have an associated NAICS code, which is an industry classification code, developed by the Census Bureau. And it's really used for a variety of things within government. It's used to classify industries for sort of economic data and analysis. But what we use it for in procurement is to classify contracts, and then look at corresponding size standards to those industry codes, to represent small businesses. So you can also go to SBA's website. We keep our what we call a table of size standards on our website. It's updated periodically with different, economic data that comes out. We will update for inflation, that kind of thing. But you can look at every North American industry classification system code and look at what its corresponding size standard is, so that you'll know if you're a small business or if you're a large business. If you haven't done that before and then you go out and look at those size standards, you will see that our size standards are pretty generous. Under SBA's size standards, I think it's something like 98% of all small business or all businesses are small, considering our size standards. But it is important for you to understand that as you look at set-asides that are put out for bid by the federal government, by the various agencies. But within the woman-owned program, this program, the federal contracting program and the set-aside program for woman-owned small businesses, really came out as an idea of trying to identify industries where women were mostly underrepresented, with the idea that we could create more opportunity and more benefit for women in industries that are not generally or traditionally owned by businesses that are owned by women. So as of today, there are only certain industries where you will see the federal government, release set-asides for bid by women-owned small businesses. North American Industry Classification System codes are set up as 4-digit codes by industry. So it covers about 113 industries versus about 1,500 total that are represented. But as you look at government requirements, they narrow it down to a 6-digit code. There are about 446 6-digit codes out of I'd say about 2,500 codes, give or take, that will be represented of woman-owned small business set-asides. So you'll see about, as this shows on the slide, the breakdown, there are about 80 6-digit codes that you will see set aside for economically disadvantaged women-owned. And we're going to talk a little bit about what the difference is. And then about 366 codes will be set aside for businesses who are woman-owned. So, which then covers about 446 codes. So you will see one or the other. You won't see a requirement come out as both or either. It is based on a listing of those 446 codes that we also keep on the website, which, let me see, yeah, this is just a screenshot. So if you go to our website and you pull up the table, which is really just an Excel spreadsheet, I think we have it out there as a PDF as well. Once you know what industries you work in, you'll want to go out and pull the table to see what NAICS code corresponds to what size, or excuse me, what woman-owned category. So I apologize, I suppose it depends on the size of your screen you're looking at, if you can see this well. But looking at just kind of in the middle, 236210, that's a 6-digit code that represents industrial building construction. That's a pretty common construction code that we see. So if you do work in that NAICS code, you'll go to the right and you'll see that set-aside category would be WOSB, or woman-owned small business. So you would only see set-asides put out by the agencies for woman-owned small businesses who are now going to be certified to bid. And conversely, if you just go down, again, since I just did a screenshot, if you kind of go to the bottom and you see some of those that are EDWOSB, So if you work in the NAICS code 315220, which is apparel manufacturing, in order to do work and bid on set-asides in that NAICS code, you would have to be economically disadvantaged because you will only see those set aside as EDWSB. So I hope that makes sense. It is a little bit confusing if you're new to this. I think the regulation will change in the future where they'll just open up all NAICS codes. But for right now, based on the studies, based on the research, these are the categories where we see the most underrepresentation of women-owned small businesses. So for now, these are where you'll see set aside categories. I just want to make one comment to that though. So if you've gotten to this point and you're looking up your NAICS codes, you know what they are, and you don't see them at all in this list, it doesn't necessarily mean there's not a benefit to pursuing federal contracting. You would not be able to bid specifically on a woman-owned or an economically disadvantaged woman-owned set-aside, but you still might be a small business who's owned by a woman. If you bid on a small business set-aside, so you're a small business, you bid on something that's not included in this set-aside program, but you bid on it and you win it, the agency can still take credit for awarding that small business contract to a business owned by a woman. So there is still great benefit to pursuing federal government work as a business owned by a woman. It just wouldn't be specific to this program. Therefore, you wouldn't need to be certified. So you would only need to be certified as a woman-owned small business if you're going to pursue this particular set-aside category. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, feel free. We're going to have plenty of time at the end. This will not take me the entire 2 hours that we have set aside for this webinar. So type your questions and Catherine and I will go through all the questions at the end. And if you need any clarification, I can definitely do that. So hopefully not to confuse things a little bit more, but just to give you an example of what your own profile might look like. So when you register to do business with the government, you're going to work with PTAC if you haven't already to get a SAM profile built. So System for Award Management, SAM, SAM.gov. Any prime contractor who wants to bid on work and more importantly be awarded work with the federal government has to be registered in the SAM.gov system. And this is where you're going to create your profile of, what does this business look like? You're going to load into that system the 6-digit NAICS codes that that represent your business, the industries that represent your business. And in this particular program, again, because I mentioned some codes fall under EDWSB, some codes fall under WOSB, your profile may have one, both, or neither, which is okay because it depends on the type of work that you're pursuing. This is just a screenshot of a generic, actually former client of PTAC, just to give you an example of this particular business. These are all the NAICS codes that this business does work in. So again, when they built their profile, when she built her profile, she had several codes that she could bid under EDWOSB if she's eligible as an economically disadvantaged woman-owned small business. Then she has a few other codes where she would only see set-asides as WSB, so she does qualify. But then she has a couple of other codes that don't fall under either program. So she may just bid as a small business, for example. So your profile is going to be a mix of different things. And some you may not even, depending on the size of your business or how you grow, you may not even be a small business anymore, depending on the size standard of that code. So again, we're not necessarily getting into size standards for this particular presentation. If you do have questions, we can certainly try to answer those as time permits. But otherwise, you can either attend one of our other courses where we really get into what is the sort of definition and meaning of size standards, or of course, always you can work with a PTAC counselor and they can kind of help you understand your business and where you fall. So just to give you an idea of how we've done in contracting sort of federal wide, actually in FY18, we just released FY19 numbers. They're hot off the press. I haven't even pulled those up yet. But in FY18, we did hit a historic high of awarding contracts. Again, this is federal wide to woman-owned small businesses. $22 billion in contracts, prime contracts went to WOSBs. And that accounted for about almost 17,000 woman-owned small business prime contractors. Generally, based on NAICS codes, it was in the professional and technical services arena, and then, of course, construction. We do see a lot of opportunity for construction, and obviously it's where the largest dollars went. However, it isn't everything. So there's plenty of opportunity for woman-owned small businesses and other categories. These just happen to be the top ones. The top 5 agencies that made those awards that year, well, SBA was at the top of that list at 28%. Office of Personnel Management, who does a lot of records keeping, that kind of thing, records management, asset management. So OPM, another big agency. HUD, Department of Interior. And then this, I thought this was interesting, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I'm guessing that might also be either scientific or records management. We've had to do some digging to see what the Nuclear Regulatory Commission purchases. But anyway, they were in the top 5 as well. And incidentally, this is partly what you would want to do as part of your market research. If you first research your NAICS codes, you look at the list to make sure that your NAICS codes are represented in these programs. Then you'll want to do your market research to see where are those buying and purchasing trends occurring with what agencies. And that really goes for any federal contractor. It isn't just for, woman-owned small businesses. It's really important to do your market research as you devise, your federal contracting kind of marketing plan. As you can probably guess, especially for those of you that are new, the federal government it's almost a $500 billion with a B, $500 billion marketplace. And they basically purchase everything you can think of. So it's important. So that's the good news, right? So the good news is they purchase a lot of things. There's a lot of money out there to be had by small businesses. But of course, the downside to that is it is big. So it's sort of figuring out where is the path to those, to that money, so to speak. So you really need to do your research, find out what agencies are purchasing within your market. What do those buying trends look like, and so on. So there are some websites out there where you can do some research. I'll mention those later. But again, I'll say this many times, you'll want to work with PTAC as well. They do a great job of pulling together some great market research for their clients to kind of give you that starting point, if you will, on how to move forward. So just to give you a kind of a snapshot of just how we've done in Nebraska. So that prior slide was kind of, nationwide, all agencies. How we've done in Nebraska, we've actually done really well in Nebraska. Nebraska-based businesses do really well in contracting. We're usually in the top 10, roughly top 10 of all states on how we do with prime contracting to small businesses. So the good news is, we are doing very well. We're bringing a lot of those dollars to Nebraska businesses, but it means we also have a lot of great savvy businesses that understand this process. So if you are new, you may want, again, if you're doing your market research, you find out who these businesses are that are winning these contracts. It might make for great, partnering or teaming opportunities in the future as well. So something to keep in mind. But I talked about the goal earlier. So nationally, our goals have been set, as you can see, and that's pretty much been set that way for the last 15 or 20 years. But then you can see in Nebraska what our achievement percentages are, particularly for this presentation in the woman-owned program. The goal is 5%. And I do believe nationally we just hit that 5% or maybe exceeded it just slightly. But in Nebraska, we tripled that goal on how we did. So we have some really good active woman-owned small businesses in the state of Nebraska. So just to give you an idea of how we do here locally. So just a real quick kind of primer on set-asides, again, for those of you that are new to the program. When an agency is looking at potentially picking a socioeconomic category that they want to set aside, again, keep in mind it's those same 5 I just showed you where we have the goals. They have to follow what we call internally, we call it the rule of 2. So an agency, when they're looking at their acquisition plans at the beginning of the year, and they've sort of, you know, they're sort of putting their money in the different areas of things that they need to purchase that year. They're looking at what categories of small business they might be able to set aside. So when a particular opportunity comes up and they're ready to go, the agency themselves will do their own market research to see who's out there. And they do this in a lot of different ways. Some of them will put sources, what we call sources sought, where they're looking for sources of small businesses. So they may post that on what used to be the FBO, Federal Business Opportunities site, which has now been put up under beta.sam, if you will. They post these sources sought opportunities where they're looking for you. So they'll put out maybe a summary scope of work, and they're looking for who might be able to do that work. So they ask you to respond by a certain date. This isn't a contract award. You know, they're not going to award based on that. They're, again, just doing market research to figure out what set-aside category they want to put it in. So if they can find at least 2 woman-owned small businesses in that for that work that could potentially do the work, then they will set it aside as a WOSB or, again, as an EDWOSB. And that goes for all socioeconomic categories. They're looking for at least 2 small businesses. They may go small business set aside. Looking for 2 8A firms, 8A certified firms, and they may go 8A set aside, and so on. But again, keeping in mind, depending on the scope of work, which they'll correspond that industry code to, will determine whether or not they set it aside WOSB or EDWOSB. So this just is a slide that I included that is kind of a summary of what I just said. So when they're looking at that particular requirement, so they know they're ready to, you know, construction's always such an easy one to use because it's so, you know, visually you can see it. So they have a building, they want to start building in the 3rd quarter. So by maybe 1st quarter, they're going to start looking for firms. They're going to decide which NAICS code they want to use. So they'll, you know, look at the type of construction it is, pick a code that they'll attach to it. Again, they'll do their market research. Again, I mentioned that they will look at this in several different ways. They may put out a sources sought. Some agencies, like the Corps of Engineers, are required to put out sources sought, but others will just do their own market research. They'll start researching websites. They may look at SAM profiles. They may look at profiles on what we call the DSBS, which is the Dynamic Small Business Search Profile. So that's another tool for you to put yourself out there for agencies to be able to find you. Again, I apologize, we're not really going to cover that in this particular class, but certainly if you work with a PTAC counselor, they'll talk to you about building a SAM and a DSBS profile page. But the agencies are out there trying to find you in different ways. And if they find you and they like what they see, they may contact you and ask you to submit a capability statement or some kind of marketing brief about your firm. They may talk to you a little bit, and that helps them determine whether or not they can set that aside. Because again, remember, they need at least 2 small businesses to be able to set that aside. And then once they make that determination to set it aside in any of those categories, then they advertise that as a pre-solicitation and an RFP for bid, again on the beta.sam site. So that's sort of how that goes. If it is a woman-owned small business set aside, if they think that you are the potential successful bidder on that contract, they have to verify that you are registered in SAM. So you will have to get registered at SAM. Again, you'll want to work with PTAC to understand that if you're not sure, how that works. But you do have to be have a registered active profile in SAM before you can be awarded. They will notify you. And then for now, in the current version of the woman-owned program, because it is currently a self-certification, they're going to go check the WOSB repository to make sure that you have your documents in the system. I'll talk a little bit about that, how we're transitioning away from that here in a second. And then, of course, if you're in there, they'll award the contract. So this is just a lovely slide that SBA created on proactively self-marketing yourself. Again, it's all really about market research. The good part about deciding that the federal government is going to be a marketplace for you to sell your goods or services, the good news about that is it's taxpayer dollars. So every dollar that the government spends to buy airplane parts all the way down to paper, that's taxpayer dollars, right? So because of that, that information is out there for you to find. So that the government is transparent in how they purchase. Now, they're not going to show you what companies bid. They're not going to show you those types of things, but you will be able to know what agency purchased what service or what good, who it was awarded to, what the total contract value was, maybe period of performance, and so on. That information is out there for you to find. So it just takes a good amount of research to be able to go out and find out how agencies are buying. You maybe even want to look at the websites of, sometimes it's easiest just to start with the websites of the agencies that you've honed in on and kind of see what their buying patterns are. What kind of things do they maybe have coming up? Some of those agencies also put out procurement forecasts. So they may put out lists of what they hope to buy over the next fiscal year. It doesn't mean that's obviously what they'll always get to purchase, but they may put out there what they hope to be purchasing. And so you can again start to collect this information and figure out kind of where you think things are coming from. You may be doing something in construction that's a brand new requirement, but you may sell something that the government buys on a reoccurring basis. So if you see a contract that's going to be expiring this month, or let's call it maybe the end of, by now it would already be out for bid, but maybe something by the end of the year, that they're going to be re-upping that contract at the end of the year, you can start the process to bid on that reoccurring contract, things like that. So understanding how they're buying, what they're buying, again, doing that research to see what their buying trends are is very helpful for you to put your plan together. You need to understand their contracting procedures. We won't get into that too much here. We do a course on marketing to the government where we talk about who are the decision makers, how to find the decision makers. But it is important for you to know the difference between contracting officers, program managers, and small business officers. So, when you really hone in on a particular agency, you need to understand who those decision makers are and who to market yourself to. Again, you want to focus on areas that you might niche or you have a priority in. Depending on what industry you're in, you need to understand what is your competitive advantage. What do you bring to the table, and how that coincides with how they buy. Again, depending on what you sell, does the government buy on price only, or do they purchase based on the best value that they'll get for the money? So not necessarily the lowest price. So different things that you have to think about. And then again, always work on your contacts. It's good to get to know contracting officers and small business specialists early in the process. But also think about, again, who your competitors are in your industry. And are they already selling to the government? It may be important to understand who they are from a competitive standpoint, but also they may be a future teaming partner or somebody that you can collaborate with to pursue a contract. So, different things to think about there. So I mentioned briefly, when you're looking at NAICS codes, just again to understand that if you look up your NAICS codes, or maybe some of you are doing that right now, and maybe you don't see your NAICS code listed as a current set-aside category, specifically for the federal contracting program, that isn't necessarily a bad news. You can't directly get certified and bid on set-asides, but again, if you are a small business owned by a woman and you bid on other types of contracts, again, that agency can take advantage of awarding that to a business owned by a woman. So they do get to, check that box, if you will, or take credit for that category. So it still provides you with, somewhat leverage as you bid on other types of set-asides. So that's important to note. But also, you wouldn't be marking yourself in SAM as WOSB. You would mark yourself as a woman-owned business, but you're also marking yourself as a small business. So you're a woman-owned business who happens to be small. But also keep in mind that there are other categories and I like to mention this in this particular class because sometimes people get those two confused. Again, WOSB and EDWOSB are the two set-aside categories at the federal level, but you may see at the state or city level, you may see WBE, which is Woman Business Enterprise. That is technically a different category. It will likely have slightly different eligibility requirements and may even have a completely separate certification that you may be required by that local government. In the third bullet here, I mentioned the DOT. They're kind of an interesting agency because they are a federal agency. The money comes from the federal level, but it's really managed at the state level. So it's somewhat of a, what I call, it's my own term, kind of a quasi federal agency. So they are the only other program that sort of has what we would call a federal agency that kind of has their own nuances. And they have a separate WBE program that you would get certified or verified under to do work with DOT. So again, my number one piece of advice here is to work with PTAG. Again, depending on the agency that you're interested in, there may be a different nuances to what you do. And you may qualify for all of them, so it's just important to think through that strategy, again, depending on which agencies that you want to do work with. So real quick, I'm just going to mention what the eligibility requirements are. They're actually pretty straightforward in this particular program. First and foremost, you have to be a small business. Again, what does it mean to be a small business? You're going to look at your industry classification codes and see which ones apply to your business. And then you're going to look at the size standard table to make sure you're a small business in those various codes. So you need to be a small business first, but then to also be considered a woman-owned, you have to be at least 51% owned and controlled by a woman. So I put a few bullets here. It's important to really review the regulation and understand what it means to be unconditionally owned and directly owned. Ownership and control is important. Particularly now, if you do pursue the certification program, you have to make it very clear in your articles of organization, you know, the way you set up your company, that the woman is not only 51% owner, but that she does control that company and control the business. Your bylaws, again, and your articles of organization can't be written to be too loosely defined that anyone else could control your business. So it's important to understand the differences with that. A couple of other additional requirements that constitute control. You do have to hold the highest officer position. So that's one of the litmus test, if you will, of the woman controlling and owning that business. She has to hold the highest position. You need to have experience to run that business. And this is one of the things that will be reviewed when they look at control, because they want to make sure that, quite frankly, there's not, you know, a company or a small business that wants to be certified that's really ran by the man or ran by a husband or a male partner, whatever. And then the woman has been put up as the front, if you will. So you want to be very careful of that. So they're going to really look at the background of the woman to make sure, if, you know, if this is a construction business, does this woman have the experience to run this company, and so on. And then in this particular program, you do have to be full-time in your business. So it can't be, you know, a business you run sort of on the side in order to do federal work. Because remember, this certification, you're getting this certification because you want to bid on contracts. And so you want to be, you know, committed to this business as you're looking to, you know, do work for the government. So there's a whole section in the regulation about what is full-time, but it basically means you have to be full-time during normal working hours. So you can't say I work 40 hours, you know, in the business, but I do it on, you know, nights and weekends. I don't sleep. So that kind of thing. Again, I mentioned this already, but make sure that your articles of organization, all agreements, everything shows that a woman or women, so you can be owned by multiple women, at least, you know, again, at least 51% by one woman or more than one woman that control that concern. No males or other entities should have the ability to exercise control. And then with this particular program, there is no minimum amount of time that you have to be in business. A couple of the other programs, there is a minimum amount of time that you have to be incorporated. This program does not have that minimum requirement. So that's just to be woman-owned. So somewhat simple, basically one requirement, 51% owned and controlled. If you know that that's the case with you, you're 100% owner, you're the only owner in the business, you have no problem showing that you're woman-owned. So you can, you know, check that box. You know you've met that requirement. In order to be additionally considered economically disadvantaged, there are basically 3 tests. This is more the black and white in the numbers. So what do you have to be economically disadvantaged? It's based on 3 things: your net worth, your personal net worth, your income, so what you know, your adjusted gross income averaged over 3 years, so they take an average, and then the fair market value of all of your assets. So as long as your personal net worth doesn't exceed $750,000, your income doesn't exceed $350,000 a year, averaged over 3 years, and the fair market value of all of your personal assets are not over $6 million, then you would be considered economically disadvantaged. Now, keep in mind, before you go to all this trouble of looking at all of these documents and deciding that you've got to submit all of this paperwork to be considered economically disadvantaged, you will want to make sure, from a strategy standpoint, the NAICS codes that you will bid under, do they apply to this ED WOSB side of things? Meaning, does your NAICS code apply to the economically disadvantaged set-aside category? If it does not, then you don't necessarily have to worry about submitting or submitting for certification under the economically disadvantaged. So if you have, you know, let's just say one code let's, just to keep it real simple, let's say you're an architect. There's one NAICS code for architecture services. That's the only thing you do. That code falls under WOSB. So that means if you bid on contracts or look for opportunities for architecture services, it's only going to ever be set aside as a WOSB because it's, again, listed under that category. So in that case, if that's all you do, you will not necessarily have to worry about becoming economically disadvantaged certification. Now, it doesn't mean you can't do it or you shouldn't. You may want to do it in case there are other things that come up. Again, depending on your marketing strategy and what is your long-term goal or plan for your business and the type of work you want to pursue, you may want to go ahead and do this, especially if you know you're well below these thresholds. You may want to go ahead and do it because, I think it's fairly obvious, but if you're economically disadvantaged, you're also woman-owned, obviously, but not the other way around. So if you at least get certified under economically disadvantaged, you will qualify for both, but not the other way around. If you just get certified as woman-owned, then obviously you're not automatically economically disadvantaged. But again, you may want to go ahead and do it, but if you don't, because you only do one thing and you do that one thing well, and you will not look for work in any other category, you may just want to get certified as woman-owned small business and call it good. So just something to kind of think through as you're deciding which way you want to go, because obviously if you take the route to become economically disadvantaged, there's a lot more paperwork involved so that they can verify these numbers are true and accurate. So something to think about. Let's see, I mentioned these things already. So again, highest office or position, make sure you have the managerial experience to be able to do it or to manage the company. 51% ownership, manage, again, control. Control has a lot to do with the daily operations of the business. And again, no minimum time in business. Again, this is just a slide to reiterate or to remind you that you do need to be registered in SAM. So first and foremost, step one, look at your NAICS codes. Again, find out which set-aside categories fit your industry, but then make sure you get yourself registered in the SAM system so that you're ready to go to bid. You do have to be registered in SAM anyway prior to submitting your certification application, because once you submit that application, they do tie your application to your SAM record, so you do have to be registered in SAM. And at least as of right now, prior to the certification going live on October 15th, because it was, or again, as of today, currently is, a self-certification, you would go into your SAM yourself and mark yourself as a self-certified woman-owned small business. That will change a little bit once the certification happens. But basically, that's what this slide represents, is getting yourself registered first, make sure your SAM record's active, submit your application, which we'll talk about that, and then you'll want to represent your status as woman-owned in the SAM system. So this is just a screenshot of what SAM looks like. We won't go into that, but again, just for those of you that might be new to this, just remember, if you want to bid on any government work, woman-owned or not, you do need to be registered in this system, and this is something that the PTAC is excellent at, so you'll want to work with them in case you have trouble getting registered in that system. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit now about the certification process itself and understanding what that is. So I kind of mentioned this a little bit already. The current self-certification process will remain open and available until October 15th. So they originally were going to close it down because of COVID and some of the other things that have occurred. They wanted to sort of slow the process down a little bit and give businesses and companies a time to adjust. So it will become a certification starting October 15th. However, it is currently up until that date will be a self-certification. So you will be able to go to certify.sba.gov right now if you want to self-certify. And again, this becomes part of your strategy and what makes the most sense for your business. If you don't plan on bidding on anything, because again, you don't really have to do this until you're ready to bid on something, or you found an opportunity you want to, woman-owned, small business set aside you want to bid on. You may just want to wait until the certification, because even if you submit your documentation for the self-certification, you will still have to submit your documentation again for the certification on October 15th. So if you're trying to bid on something that is going to come out next week, then you'll want to get self-certified and take that time to do that. But if you don't anticipate that happening, you may want to just go ahead and wait again, so you don't have to repeat the process for the certification. But to the point of this, if you do want to self-certify, you can do that again for the next, well, exactly 30 days. But then again, as of October 15th, businesses will have to be certified through the new system, which I'm going to show you what that is. Or you can still use our approved third-party certifiers. So if you were self-certified prior, or you at least know about the self-certification, you may know that we have 4 approved certifying bodies or certifying organizations out there. Those same 4 organizations will still help you do the certification. If that's the case and you want to work with them, all you would need to do is upload their approved certification into the system. So we'll talk a little bit about those organizations as well. They are actually all listed out on the WOSB Ready site as well. So you could contact them. They're all prepared to help you. The only, let's see if I included them. I did not include their names here. But again, all 4 bodies are out there. I think one's the Hispanic Women's Chamber, one is the U.S. Women's Chamber, WeBank, the Women Business Enterprise Council, and there's a 4th one. Those 4 are ready to help you. What I will say though is most all of them, unless they've changed, most all of them charge a fee to help you. So now if you want to get certified, you can certainly do that directly with the government SBA. And it doesn't cost you anything. The government itself will never charge you for doing this. But those 4 organizations have been allowed to charge a fee if they so choose. Now, they're not going to necessarily charge you a fee just to do the certification. It's really to become probably some type of member of their organization. And they do offer lots of other benefits to their organizations. So I think it's important for you to just go out and do your research if you want to go that route. So if they do charge you, the $350 or $500 to do the certification, what other benefits are you getting? Some of them offer networking opportunities, educational opportunities. So there's different things that they may offer for that fee. But again, that is up to you to decide. I know plenty of businesses that have used these certification programs and these organizations because they don't want to hassle with it themselves, and they feel like they get some benefit out of being a member. But again, that's up for you, for you to decide if it's worth that. If you do not want to, then by all means, if you go directly to SBA's certification site and upload the documents yourself, it won't cost you a dime. So just something to keep in mind. So on October 15th, when it does become a certification, this is the website. So instead of certified.sba.gov, which is where we house self-certification, certification will be housed at beta.certified.sba.gov. So they are close, but they are technically 2 separate sites. So keep that in mind when you go to do this process. Incidentally, if you decide to start uploading your documents today, they will not be reviewing them until starting October 15th. So you have some time to get your documents in, but the certifications will not start to happen or be reviewed until October 15th. But certainly you could go ahead and start this process. At this website as well, 2 places really, the SBA.gov website, again at the WSB Ready, or at the beta site, there's a lot of really good information. There's a quick start guide for applicants, so kind of a step-by-step quick start. How do I do this process? And there's also the checklist of the documents that you will need. I think I might have a slide where we cover that real briefly, but there is the checklist on all the documents that you will need. And there's also the applicant user guide for the beta.certified.sba site, and it's a pretty thick document. We have been told by headquarters that there's been a lot of traffic on the help desk site, and we have been told that the majority of the questions, now I wouldn't say all of them certainly, but the majority of the questions and that have been coming in can and have been covered in the applicant user guide. So I would suggest, before you submit a question to the help desk and who knows how quickly they can get to you, really read that applicant user guide to see if maybe your question or issue can get answered via there. But anyway, that is the website where you'll upload your documentation. One other thing I did want to mention, I'm glad I had this bullet here. So there's really three, well, I guess technically there's 4 ways to do the certification. So I mentioned 2. Do it yourself, collect the documentations in the checklist, upload all of them and go that route, and then, wait to be notified. Go through one of the 4 third-party certifiers that I mentioned. So that's a second way. And the other 2 ways are if you happen to be a veteran who has already been verified by the VA. So there is a separate verification process you can go through the VA to be a veteran or a service-disabled veteran. Or if you happen to already be 8A certified, you can submit those verifications as well. So they all follow the same criteria. So if you applied, you would have had to submit that documentation as well. So those are the other 2 ways than the other 2. So again, the 4 ways to sort of help you simplify, if you will, what you would need to upload for this certification. So if you fit any one of those other 4, well, I should say other 3, the 4th one being that you just upload all the documents. So keep that in mind. And then again, I already mentioned it, self-certification option is currently available until the 15th of October. And then after that, you go to the beta.certify site, and they are not linked. So if you are in the self-certification site, you will have to separately go into the certification site and upload your documentation. Now, if nothing's changed in your business and you are already in the self-certification portal, you could just download all of those documents and then just resubmit them. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, and I don't know, the 2 systems don't talk to each other. So, but it's easy enough. You could download everything that's sitting out there, and then you could submit it up through the certification site. So this is just a slide that sort of says exactly that again. So if you are going to bid on something as of October 15th, you'll need to be in that system prior to bidding. Again, use the free online site, use a third-party certifier, or if you qualify for the veteran program or you qualify for the 8A program, yeah, and the current certification. So that's everything I already said. So they created this little timeline for us that I thought was helpful. And there's actually information at the beta site as well that kind of gives you some options and a timeline of how this sort of goes. July 15th was really an additional cutoff date, but and I apologize, we did this class in July, I think, actually. So we talked a little bit about what the changes that occurred in July, but as of everybody on this particular call or this webinar, you're just good to go now till October 15th to get your stuff ready into the certification site. So the certification options, this particular document, I just screenshotted it for the presentation, but I do think it's important for you to look at so that you understand how this works in terms of when you bid. So it's important to understand that, pre-certification, how did it work as a self-certified firm versus post-regulation or post-certification, how does it work if you have active contracts, no contracts, or no active contracts, but you want to bid. So I think it's important for you to kind of look at this document as well. Again, this is at either site. You can either find it on the WOSB Ready site, or they keep it in the FAQs, I believe, on the Beta Certify site, so that you can understand sort of the timeline or how it works based on when you decide to bid. So if you, for example, if you're a self-certified firm and you do have an active contract, so that means you were eligible at the time of the offer for the contract and you were self-certified at that time, then you keep that self-certification, if you will, through the life of that particular contract, up to a certain point, depending on how long-term that contract is. And then you might have to go get certified. So again, I don't want to get too heavy into that portion of it. I mean, certainly if you have some questions about it, let us know. It can get really in the weeds, if you will, and complicated, but it's just important to know sort of where are you at in that process, depending on your business. You know, if you're not self-certified, you don't have any active contracts, then it's pretty easy. October 15th, you just go certification, then you start bidding. But again, depending on where you're at, it might affect what you need to do moving forward. So again, on the homepage, there's access to the checklists. You can get a quick verifying your eligibility, which I've kind of already talked about. They put a really good FAQ out on this site about every question you can hopefully almost imagine they put out there with some answers. Again, there is a help desk though, so you can submit a help ticket if you do need assistance with something that you can't find in any of the documentation or user guides that they have. And of course, you do have to create an account. It will tie via your DUNS number. It will tie back to your SAM record. So again, make sure your SAM registration is active. You're gonna look at the qualifications and what you're gonna need based on, see, I thought I had that, based on the checklist. I wanted to be able to show you real quick the checklist. Yeah, so they have a snapshot here of this cute little slide that they created where you can click on the link to get to the checklist. So again, keeping in mind whether you're going to pursue WOSB or EDWOSB, so which checklist that you'll need. I did just kind of put a couple of bullets from the checklist so you could understand. I think I kind of talked about these, to be able to prove that you're woman-owned, but to also, if you're going to choose the economic disadvantage, what kind of documentation will be needed to prove that. So you'll need both personal and business tax returns, and they require the last 3 years. A couple of different IRS forms. Again, remember they're tracking or looking at what are your total assets, so you will have to provide detailed documentation on what assets you have. They're going to be looking at your net worth, as I mentioned, so you're going to have to talk about what your list of liabilities are and of course your assets as well, so they can come to your net worth determination. And then again, information about your income. So there is quite a lot of documentation that you will have to submit if you want to pursue the economic disadvantaged route. So again, we'll want to make sure that that is in fact the route you want to go, prior to doing all of that work. I screenshotted this because I wanted to be able to show you the knowledge base is what they call it, to where you can find all the user guides, all the forms that you need. There's even a few training videos. I mean, they really have done a good job with rolling out this particular program so that you can really see everything that you could possibly need in order to submit for this program. So again, it's all housed under that knowledge base tab. Oh, I do have a slide, I apologize. So these are the 4 third-party certifiers that have been approved. So my suggestion would be to go to their websites. they're going to follow the same requirements and eligibility requirements that we have. So it's all of those same things. They're just going to collect that information from you. So again, if that's something you're interested in, these are the 5 ones that have been approved by SBA. Not to get too heavily into, again, into the weeds of this part, but in terms of certifying, so if you're a regulation junkie like me and you like to read the laws, the Code of Federal Regulation is actually the regulatory document, if you will, that manages all of the small business programs. Anything that has to do with business and industry is under Part 13. And then Section 127 covers the entire woman-owned program. So, you know, for those of you that are really looking at government contracting as a real market for you, I think it would behoove you to spend some time looking at some of the regulations. The regulations cover everything from eligibility, maintaining eligibility, you know, when do I need to be certified in terms of making an offer or being awarded. And then it also covers things like protests. So the bigger you grow and the more you do this, you never know, you may be subject to a protest, or you may want to be someone who protests something. So I think it's important to kind of get a good foundation of the regulations. So for what that's worth, you can do that electronically now. That used to come in big books that we would get sent every year. But now you can find the CFR electronically at the ecfr.gov. But again, that has to do with anything that makes you eligible as a small business to participate in these programs. And just as a side note, you may have heard of the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation. That's the other side of the regulation on how agencies purchase goods and services from you as small businesses. So that too is electronic. You can find it online. So it may be something that you want to look at just to familiarize yourself with how those processes work. Because protests and appeals are a very real thing in federal contracting. Some people, you know, are not what they say they are. So if you are what we call an interest, you know, I'm just going to kind of summarize the protest section, but it's important to understand your rights as someone who bids. If you feel like someone who bid, or you know, someone you bid against was awarded the contract unfairly for whatever reason, maybe you don't think they're actually woman-owned, maybe you know something, as an interested party, you can protest. And conversely, the same thing may happen to you. So it's important to understand what your rights are to be able to protest and appeal. So if you have more questions about that, we can certainly help you with that. But it's just important to sort of know that that exists. And as you get more into federal contracting, understand, you know, how that process works. Especially in this particular program, I guess I should just mention, you know, one of the reasons SBA really worked diligently to try to get this certification implemented, you know, it has been a self-certification for several years. Unfortunately, as a self-certification, by you know, putting information into a system, checking the boxes, saying that you're a woman-owned small business, self-certified, you know, you are, you know, for all intents and purposes, the agencies look at that and they say you are what you say you are. Unfortunately, there are people who fraud the government. There are also people who unintentionally do it because they don't know or understand the process. And some of these things have happened, particularly in a self-certification program. So by trying to get it implemented into a certification, it does at least help to eliminate some of those issues, because now you have the SBA actually certifying the firms. But I would suspect we would see protests go down after the certification, which is really our goal. It really holds up the process, obviously. Agencies can't award their contracts and get their projects completed, because we have to go through some of these processes. So we're hoping by implementing the certification that really eliminates that quite a bit. Again, just some resources of places to go. I've already mentioned it several times. The WSB Ready site, honestly, is probably the best place for you to go. But locally, if you do have questions about anything, I'm always available via email or phone if you have additional questions as you go. Because the certification is a little bit new, the PTAC is learning the processes as well and trying to, meander through some of the issues and nightmares that always come with any new implementation of a program. So you can work with them. But again, I would suggest at least downloading the user guide and some of the quick start guides before you kind of start this process also. And again, I mentioned some handouts. These are the important ones that I've already mentioned them again, that you need to make sure you download at least the checklist. So go to the Beta SAM site, go to the knowledge base, download all of the different checklists, make sure you get the user guide and so on. And again, review the CFR so that you can understand how it works and when you need to be certified in terms of time of offer and those kind of things. If you do have other questions though, the WSB program does have their own mailbox, so you can email them as well with questions. And that's more eligibility type questions. If you feel like you're not getting your question answered, you could email them if you have a question about eligibility. But if you have a specific question about the beta site, then that's the help@certified.sba.gov. And so with that, that is my email address there. I included Catherine's again. She mentioned hers earlier, but if you're not already working with PTAC and you definitely want to be, you definitely should be, whether it's this program or any contracting work that you want to do. And that, again, is Catherine's email if you want to try to get connected with a counselor, depending on where you're located in the state. Again, my name's Lisa, but my legal name is Melissa, so that's my my email address if you have questions for me. And I think that's it, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. As Lisa said many times throughout the presentation, if you want to work with PTAC and you are not, and you don't know who your consultant would be, please email me and I will get you in touch. Okay, so we have a few questions. One from Barbara: can all economically disadvantaged women-owned small businesses also apply for women-owned small business NAICS codes?
Yes, so that's a great question, Barbara. So yeah, when I made the comment that if you're economically disadvantaged and you are eligible, then just by virtue you are also woman-owned. So yes, if you apply and get certified as EDWSB, then you are essentially eligible for any NAICS code. Yes, good question.
Okay, thank you. I have a question from Kelly. We won't be able to bid on everything that fits under our NAICS code, correct? I'm not sure if maybe Kelly, you could get a little more specific on that question.
Yeah, so the only thing I will say to that, and again, yeah, Kelly, let us know what more specifics of what you mean, but I mean, any NAICS code that you applies to the industry that you do work in, as long as you do work in that industry, and obviously as each contract opportunity comes up, you'll have to read the scope of work and you need to be able to make sure you can meet the requirements of that scope of work. But as long as you can, then yeah, you're eligible as long as you're a small business for that NAICS code. You can bid on any NAICS code that applies to you. So again, got to be small business. You got to be able to, meet the level or the complexity of the scope of work as long as you can. And you are, again, woman-owned small business and you're certified, then you would be able to bid on any of that work that applies to you or any of those codes that apply to you.
Great, thank you. Okay, I have another question from Barbara. If a company is a self-certified women-owned small business and not required to be renewed until December of this year, do they still need to recertify as a WOSB per new SBA regulations on October 15th of this year, or do they have until December?
Great question. So that is why this I mentioned, and I kind of showed a screenshot of that certification, kind of a matrix table. It's important because it depends on if you have any active contracts or not. So short answer is yes. Even if you're, well, I guess I should back up. It depends on what you mean by end of the year. So if you're self-certified, it does not expire. So you don't have to renew a self-cert. You know, even prior to the certification coming into play, you never had to recertify for the woman-owned program. So if you're woman-owned, you've self-certified, you are that unless something changes in your business. So I guess I should make that point first. I guess you might want to let me know more specifically what you might mean by that. But more importantly, it does depend on whether you hold any active contracts or not in terms of self-certified or certified. But again, no date or timeline applies to your self-certification. So being that said, the important thing to do would be, even if you're self-certified now, if you have an active contract, that self-certification stays with you on that active contract, even if it goes beyond October 15th. So again, only if you have an active contract. But if you don't, and you're just a small business, woman-owned small business that has no contracts under that self-certification, then yes, all of those businesses must be certified on October 15th to pursue new work. So I hope that makes sense. So let's just break it down very first, because this is an important question, an important point. Every business who wants to bid on anything after October 15th must be certified. So 1 month from now, which again, if you have no active contracts, you're going to bid in the future, every single business who's woman-owned who wants to bid must get certified on October 15th. So everyone essentially has to be certified. It's only those self-certified firms who hold a current contract under the self-certification that has a slightly different nuance. But it's only, again, for that current contract you hold. If you're going to go after contract number 2, then you will have to be certified. I hope that makes sense. So that's kind of how that works.
Great. Thank you, Lisa.
Sure.
Okay, that is all we had for questions. Like Lisa said, if you have any more, please email us.
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you, Catherine. Yeah, if that needs more clarification, yeah, just email me offline, and I can definitely help walk you through that a little bit better. Or again, go out to the website, the beta site, and get that options table. I think that does a really good job of laying out what I think the main question that Barbara's asking. So.
Okay, well, great. Thank you. I have another question from Anitra that just came in. Are these trainings specific to American Indian-owned businesses? Or are there trainings specific to American Indian-owned businesses?
Well, that's a good question. So short answer, technically no, we're not planning necessarily any, because there is no separate socioeconomic category recognized in federal procurement for Native American owned. But being that said, if you are Native American owned, you may be eligible for the 8A program. So the 8A program is for various socioeconomic groups, Native American being one of those groups. So if you are eligible, you could apply to become 8A certified, and then you would enjoy the benefits, if you will, of the 8A program. So that's kind of a sidestepping way to answer your question. That no, not specific to Native American, but it may apply to the 8A program. So which is a good segue to end this, which is
Yeah.
As Catherine mentioned, we will be doing a class on the 8A program next week. So you may want to come and listen to that particular webinar.
Yes, next Tuesday, same time. So if you can't find the registration for that, please email me. Okay, Lisa, thank you so much for taking the time today. It was very helpful. And like we said, if you have questions or if you want to get a hold of your PTAC consultant to help you with any of this certification process, please email me. And I will talk to you next week, Lisa. Thank you.
All right, sounds great. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate your time. Have a good rest of your week.